Hello and welcome, Exiles. Today I want to bring your guys' attention to two really big winners in terms of new skills they're adding that I think are really spicy, and I'm probably going to end up using on my league start. Now, the first one I really find interesting is Tornado of Elemental Turbulence. Number one, I like this skill because the gameplay of it, to me, looks pretty dang fun. And the clip right after this, you'll see this guy playing Tornado. He summons it, and this thing has a pretty sizable AoE. And it moves decently fast. It's not going to clear faster than your character. Like, if you have a fast character, you're going to outrun it. But if you cast it on one pack and there's another pack behind it, it's going to go and take out that second pack within a relative time frame. And it just auto-locks on enemies and goes and chases them down. You'll see the Flame Tornado and the Tornado behind it. It's going to go over here. It's going to see there's a yellow pack here. And they're both going to stick on that yellow guy until he's dead. And I think this seems like a pretty strong mechanical skill in terms of you cast it once on a pack, it's going to clear the whole thing, and it's going to keep going. Now, numerically, how does this skill shake out and why am I excited about it? Because if it has bad numbers, it's not going to matter. If it has bad numbers, then it's like, sure, it looks cool, but it's bad, and therefore it might feel bad to play because you're not killing monsters. Well, the numbers are actually pretty good, I would say, in the early game. I think it's missing the scaling vector that most other spell skills get, which is cast speed. It has a limit. The limit is you can have 3 maximum tornadoes, and it has a set hit rate. It deals damage every 0.25 seconds. Now, mathematically, how this ends up shaking out is if you're like trying to normalize this in terms of like a damage number, at base, it's very effective when you're talking about a character that doesn't have a lot of cast speed. Now, I'm just going to break this down for you real quick. If you have 3 tornadoes and they each hit 4 times a second, you're getting 12 hits per second. I like to normalize skills based on how much damage does it deal per second. Like, for example, you have cast times of 0.75, 0.5, 0.8. I like to normalize it as 1 second. So essentially what's happening here, in a matter of 1 second, we're hitting 12 times with a 65% damage effectiveness. So this skill ends up being around 780% damage effectiveness per second as it's being normalized. Just as a comparison, a very high damage skill, just to compare, would be Firestorm. I use Firestorm a lot in my Spellblade characters because it's just very high damage. There's a lot of skills that are just higher damage than others. Firestorm's is a decent bit stronger than most other skills, has a good AoE. Firestorm, for example, is 80% effectiveness, so it starts out at 0.8. It has a 4.25 multiplier on the main hit, and then it has a cast rate of 0.75, and I divide by 0.75 to normalize it as a 1 second to cast time. Now, this is giving you 450% effectiveness. This number goes up if you get 1 additional hit, along with if you cast like 3 on an enemy and you get the extra hits. It ends up being higher than this, but at baseline, if you're just talking about the big chunky hit and you're like casting really fast, you're not going to get a lot of extra hits. You're going to get a couple. This ends up being, at baseline, actually quite a bit lower than Tornado of Elemental Turbulence. Now, where the comparison comes in, where I'm saying this Tornado has a scalar that other skills, it doesn't have a scalar that other skills get, it's cast speed, because you have the max Tornado. So obviously, if I invest into 100% cast speed, this is going to end up doubling that, right? Whereas if I invest into cast speed into this skill, it's going to make it feel better, but its damage top end effectiveness per second is going to remain the same. Now, that being said, on a league start situation, for the most part, very few builds are going to get enough cast speed where they even can make, very few skills are going to be able to scale past this damage effectiveness early in terms of, like, say you have 50% cast speed on the tree or 75% cast speed on the tree. That's still almost, for most skills, that's not enough to make them higher damage effectiveness. And this is a skill that auto locks on enemies, has an AoE, has a 4-second duration, and travels around. So it's got a lot of quality of life to it. So quite frankly, I think this would be a really good league start skill. Whether or not it ends up being that, I mean, it's a 5 base crit, so it's a bit lower base crit. Most spells are like 6 base crit. I'm excited for it. I'm probably going to try to play this on my Energy Blade build, because if you looked at the patch notes, you would have gone through and you've came away with the conclusion that Energy Blade didn't get nerfed like at all, which is a pretty dang big wig considering how strong the build archetype is. The only nerf it really took is skills that are good with Energy Blade, like Stormbrand of Indecision was one of my go-to picks, got a very heavy nerf. Stormbrand of Indecision is still probably a mid-tier / above average skill, but it's much more in line with the rest of the game now. And then, of course, Penance Brand, the skill that was better than everything, is now comparable with most of the top tier skills. It's probably still a top 5 skill. It took about a 65 to 70% damage nerf, for example, but that still puts it in the top echelon of skills in terms of damage. That just is how broken the damage on that skill was. Anyways, the point being is, I'm really excited for this skill for a lot of reasons. Looks cool, has some nice quality features, should be really good in Sanctum to be able to cast a couple skills, have it go target a guard, and then just kind of jump around, dodge. It's got great things going for it. I'm excited about this. Now, the second skill that I really took away as a strong skill out of the new bunch, there's some decent ones probably, but I'm not as familiar with. Like, for example, there's Poisonous Concoction, which if you go to the media kit all the way at the bottom here, you download this press kit, there's a few more images that come with it. One of them is Incinerate Venting, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But for example, Poisonous Concoction of Bouncing, this could be really, really strong. It just kind of depends how consistently you get chain bounce hits, and that, I don't know. You're gonna need to play test this to actually know whether or not this is good. But outside of this, a skill that I can say with pretty relative confidence is actually going to be quite strong is the Incinerate of Venting. This skill itself, I think, takes the cake for probably top 5 damage effectiveness skills in the game now as far as spells go. Because the way you look at this is it's Incinerate, but it has 12 stages, which ends up meaning this 25% more is you go up to max stages and you're dealing 300% more damage per hits, and it's a 0.2 cast time. So if you do a little bit of math, say you have 0.5 effectiveness, and then you multiply it by 4 because you have 300% more damage at max stages, and then you add in the cast time, which is a 0.2 cast time, so you normalize it to 1 second. This is 1,000% effectiveness compared to like Firestorm, which starts at 450. It's almost double the damage. Granted, that's not factoring in the extra hits Firestorm gets, but the point is there's a very high damage skill in Firestorm, and Incinerate blows it out of the water. Granted, you have to stand still, you have to channel, but I think with how this skill has an upgrade in AoE, a build that has really fast cast time, I think it would end up feeling pretty decent to play. Myself, I have League-started Incinerate before with a much weaker version of the skill, which is the base version that it is now. And I did that a few leagues back, and I had a good time. It was decent damage. Granted, the standstill was a bit of an issue, but I think with the much higher damage and much higher AoE this version of the skill has, I think you can start to not feel so bad about the standstill thing, start getting a decent amount more cast speed, maybe delegate some of your damage investment into defenses, and you end up with still a very solid package. So this skill and the Tornado, I am just very, very excited about playing. I wanted to point out these two in particular because I'm thinking about my Leaguestarter. Spellblade, just from all the tests I've done, is just, I think, a smoother transition between the dual wield meta Templar leveling into Inquisitor Spellblade setup. It just is very smooth, and it gets me excited to play. So I wanted to point out these two skills because I think that's what I'm going to end up trying to do. But we'll see when it comes to League Start. Of course, I'm going to make a video guide on the character with all my planned progression, my recommended gear item buys, maybe a export or import folder for better trading extension, so you can have a list of items you can probably trade search for, stuff like that. I'll work on the guide that's going to be coming out in a couple days as I, refine it a little bit. But I wanted to point out these two skills because I think they're really, really strong. And of course, I don't know, everybody is making a video about like the overall patch notes, so I didn't want to just rehash the same info everybody's already heard. But I wanted to look at and highlight two skill gems that I think are really, really cool and worth noting for potential use because I'm going to plan to use them myself. Anyways, hopefully you enjoyed the video. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care and peace out.